Today we're going to do a very basic tutorial on Synths and Audio Tool. The first thing we'll do is open up the app button, then start an empty session, skip the tutorial, and get started. So first synth we'll look at is this one, which is based off an analog synth. An analog synth essentially is a synth that exists in real life, or is modeled after a synth that exists in real life, and it's one that you can actually go to, manipulate with your hands, move the knobs, and touch. This one is based off a synth called the Moog, a very popular synth used in rock music, electronic, soul, R&B, funk. Very popular, and it manipulates quite well. So here we're going to start by playing a C chord, and we're going to draw in our C chord note by double clicking on the note here on our piano roll. So we're going to do C, E, G. We're going to select all of them and move it to the start of the second measure. And we want to zoom out and just repeat this so it keeps playing. Now here, when I zoom in, when I play it, you hear that only one oscillator is playing. That's this one. If I turn it off, nothing plays. If I turn it on, it plays again. So let's go down and see what these things do. Here the panorama just affects whether it plays to the left or right. If you have your headphones, you'll hear it better than on speakers. Below here we have our volume level. Pretty self-explanatory. Here we have our tune, which affects how detuned you get. You can detune down or detune up. For the time being, we'll keep it at 0. Below that we have our octaves. Octaves are 12 notes, higher or lower from the original note. So here we have a note at C5. You can barely see it, but it's right there. If we move an octave up, it'll go to C6, but it'll stay in the same key. And up to 3 octaves, and down up to 3 octaves as well. So we're going to keep it down 1 octave. Here are our waves that we'll be using. Right now we're playing a sine wave, which gives you this kind of round character. If we move up, we'll move up to the triangle wave, gives it a little bit more grit, all the way to the saw, which is right here. I wish this was moving along with, but you can tell 78% is around here. The saw wave gives you the most grit, and then all the way up to our 100% square wave. So we're going to move it, let's say, to about 50%. So that would be around here. And now we're going to use another oscillator. So we'll turn this one on. Maybe we want to keep this octave where it is, since this one's one below, and move this all the way up. Maybe a little lower. So without it off, you only hear one. With it on, you hear both. And here you can use up to 3 oscillators. And that's what you want to do. Just kind of play around with these oscillators, tune them differently, and move them up different octaves so that they're not all playing in one octave, which will create muddiness in your mix. And that'll create an interesting sound for your synth. Here we have a noise, which if we turn on, you see it's a little bit too aggressive. So we're going to turn the volume down and just let it blend into our mix. So you don't really hear the white noise, but it just gives it a little bit more character and grit to your synth. And we can affect the color of it. You can tell how bright and how dark it gets. Below here we have a filter. Our frequency knob affects the frequencies of the filter. We move down. We start taking out some high frequencies and start only playing low. We play this one. Next to it, we start taking out, bringing in low frequencies rather than taking out high, until we just play just high frequencies. So that's up to you which one you like to use more often. I like to use this one. Resonance affects how high pitched that frequency is. So the higher the resonance, it sounds like you're adding gain to that frequency. Especially if you go down, you'll hear it. So we'll go all the way up for the time being. Put down the resonance. Here we have an LFO. An LFO changes the modulation, and it basically gives you an effect to your synth. So if we press play, here we have the wave, which is the type of LFO modulation you'll be using. You can just go around and experiment, see what each one does. And here we have our destinations. Our destinations affects which one of these oscillators you want to use, or a filter, for example, the whole thing. And the depth affects how much we're affecting. So if we press oscillator 1, turn that on, and move up to depth, just this oscillator will be affected. And we can move it down, it affects it differently. I want to turn that off and just affect the filter. Now if I turn that on, you're starting to get this wobbly, pumping sound. And depending on what the rate is, you get more of a wobble. Now you can also press sync, and that does it by beat. Last thing is here we have a glide. Which just adds more character, almost like it's gliding in. And polyphone up here is turned on for when you want to play chords or make play more notes than one at a time. And so, for example, chords, you're playing 3 at a time here, so you want to have this on. If you kept monophone on, then when I played it, only the root note would play. So monophone is good if you're making bass lines. Polyphone better if you're playing chords. Alright, so that's the analog synth. Digital, I'm going to run through, is very similar. Okay, digital is a synth that doesn't exist in real life, only in software. So we'll double click here, and you see we have the same thing happens down here. We get a grid with our MIDI file, so we'll move that one down. We'll press play, and we see this wave, the sinus, is the first wave being played. Double click, we can choose whichever wave we want. Semitone affects the same thing, up, low. You can also change the pitch by moving these. And here we have an envelope. The envelope essentially, before I move on to this, this is your main mix gain, so as long as it's turned on all the way, or close to it, you'll hear that synth. Move it down, you won't hear anything. So we can move the second synth, we'll just play that, and turn this one up. And we'll start to hear a different synth being created. Now here we have our envelopes. The attack is how soon the chord or the sound will start to play. I actually don't like this, so I'll turn it down. So if I move this further right, it's almost going to sound like a pad, like it's sweeping in, and we can affect the bend. So essentially you could mess around with the attack, decay, which is how short or how long it plays, here at the bottom, while also affecting the bend, just for more manipulation and modulation. Sustain, if there's low sustain, it plays very short. Long sustain plays very long, and same thing with release. Short, it ends very quickly. Here we have our LFO, which is the very same thing. And if we want to use this LFO, we just go to our synth, LFO 1, and turn it up. And move this offset. And change the rate. Our filter, same thing. We just use this to affect, see what we want to affect. Here is a high pass, so we're taking out all the highs. Then we can move it here and just take out the lows. And these dB affect how steep the filter is. Up here we have another glide tool, does the same thing. Another detuning tool for the whole synth. And here, whether it's polyphone, legato, which is a different type of sound, just one note, or mono. And that's essentially the basics of analog and digital synths in Audio Tool.